The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host, guest, random reptoid, or chupacabra may not necessarily reflect those of AM 950 Radio, its affiliates, or its sponsors. Now, it's time to step into the unknown. There are things people experience but never talk about. A shadow moving in the corner, flickering of the lights, a disembodied voice. We invite you to talk with us. Share your story, share your experience, because this isn't just your story, this is our story. This is GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun.
And this is GhostBox Radio on AM 950, where every night we talk about the paranormal, ufology, Bigfoot, and so much more. My name is Greg Bakun. Thank you very much for joining us on this Tuesday evening. Really appreciate it tonight. We're going to get right into it because the conversation I wanted to take forward tonight is one that has been on my mind for a while lately, and it kind of evolved originally from me kind of sitting down and when I'm trying to figure out who to bring on the show, asking questions like, where do cults come from? How do cults, like leaders, can get so many people to follow them and sometimes even brings them to death? And I wanted to have a conversation about it. And one that came immediately to mind was the Heaven's Gate cult that ended with a mass suicide with about 39 people that believe that they have actually their sacrifice of their lives had led them to be on board a ship that was following a comet. And there's so much to talk about here. So I was really excited. I reached out to author Benjamin Zeller. He is a professor of religion at Lake Forest College, and he wrote a book called Heaven's Gate, America's UFO Religion, and this book is pretty incredible, and I wanted to talk about this tonight. So, Ben, welcome to GhostBox Radio.
Thank you so much for having me, Greg. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much. You know, this has been something, and I've talked to a couple people about this, that I was going to bring you on, that we're going to talk about it. A couple people were... They weren't quite sure what this particular cult was, because I think now we're heading on to the 30th anniversary of the mass suicides. But the idea of how this all came about and the ultimate end is really very frightening. And I wanted to kind of talk about everything that led up to the end, because we know about the end, right? We know how it ends. That's pretty well known. We know about at least what we realized at the time was Marshall Applewhite. I didn't realize that there was a second leader that had passed away earlier. Can we talk a little bit about what Heaven's Gate was, first of all, please?
Sure, absolutely. And I'm often surprised. So I am a college professor, I teach this material every year, and I ask my students at the start of the semester, who's heard of Heaven's Gate? And a few of them have, from documentaries and podcasts and things like that. But most of the students in the class at 25 will not have heard of it. And then I start giving the details. There was a comet. They were wearing the Nike tennis shoes. There was the some of them are castrated. There was the applesauce, and the hands keep going up. So by the end, most students have heard of the group. They just don't know the details. And in fact, as you pointed out, people often don't know the long history of the group, that it had two founders, it had two leaders, that actually started in the early 1970s. We remember the 1997 mass suicide, as you pointed out. But yeah, it goes all the way back to the two founders who started in 1972. And there was over 20 years of history before the end.
That's amazing. I mean, and that's amazing, because I was reading the book. I was doing some other research on it as well. And to me, when I hear about this stuff, you'd think to sustain people for that long, to follow along, to have that end goal, you think that in my mind, I think that would be pretty like a quick turnaround. But they not only sustained that, they kept a lot of members. They also, they truly kept it. They kept the members from society as well.
Yeah, truly fascinating as a sort of sociologist of religion to think about how the group was able to sustain itself. The assumption is often if you make predictions about the end of the world and say we're going to get off the planet, which they were doing back in the 1970s, when that doesn't happen over time, you'd expect the group to die. And it doesn't. Now, it does shrink. So there was a lot of attrition in the group. It had several hundred members at its peak back in the 70s, 3, 4, even 500 members. Maybe it's probably in the lower end of that. But then it shrinks over time down to 30, but basically 40 by the end. There were some people who were sort of half members who were sort of in the orbit of the group, so to speak. So it really did lose probably 95% of its members over time. But there were a core group of people that really were invested in the fundamental claim of the founders of leaving the planet. The basic idea from beginning to end was that individuals would transform themselves. You would transform from this sort of corrupt, earthly human body into this perfect angelic, what they call it, next level extraterrestrial body, which would be waiting for you in outer space. And initially the thought was they would get onto the UFOs sort of in bodily form. And then later it became a sort of a consciousness transfer. And that's what enables the suicide idea.
Do you know why it whittled down so much over the years? Because that is quite a big shift in how many people were following. Would it be fair to say maybe some of the ideas started to become more radical, and maybe people started to think that that's getting a little bit much for them?
It's possible. I mean, we know from early on that a lot of people who joined really didn't know what they were getting into.
Sure.
So when there were hundreds of people in the 1970s, they got the message, but they weren't told how to do it. And then when they join, and the basic message is give up your humanity. So that means don't talk to your family, abandon your family. If you have a kid, leave them. Don't talk to your parents. If you're married to someone or dating someone, you have to dump them. You have to separate yourself from all of sort of the attachments of the world. No drugs, no alcohol, no sex.
Yeah.
They took jobs, but they took jobs only to pay the bills. You couldn't be invested at work. You're not going to hang out afterwards for drinks with your work buddies. You're going to go back to the group. Anything which attaches you to the world, you had to prune yourself of. And yeah, it shrunk absolutely, because people who said that's not what I signed up for. So it shrunk really quite rapidly. The people who made it past that first hurdle, some of them also left over time, really when it was clear that this was not happening immediately. And sort of over time, the difficulty of doing that. So people who said, yeah, I'm willing to try for 6 months being celibate and, not having drugs or alcohol and sort of living at a campground. But after 4, 6, 7, 12 months of that, and nothing's happening, there were plenty who left. But again, what's interesting to me as a sociologist, from a sociological perspective, is why is it that some people stayed? What was the attraction? We know, and I'll get controversial here. We know it's not brainwashing because people were leaving. Brainwashing is supposed to work.
Yeah.
So if it was brainwashing, the people you get in would stay. They didn't. Massive numbers of them left. So either we have to say, well, brainwashing works for some people, or we have to say, well, what was it that made some people to make these very, very unusual choices to stay in a group where they have no freedoms, where eventually they were asked to commit suicide? And that is really in some ways what drove me to write the book.
I could understand that. And, I want to get more into that. And the other question I wanted to ask too is here we are in the 1970s when this starts up. And I mean, how much of what was happening around us at the time was a factor for a lot of these people to join? Because I mean, there was a lot of economical strife. It was the whole things kind of felt a little bleak in certain areas. When it comes to maybe, I don't want to say living, but lifestyle perhaps. And and I don't know if that really had any sort of impact on people. Like, I need something, and maybe they're thinking that this is something that could be a more positive influence in their life too.
Yeah, I think you're touching on two really important things. One is sort of what drew individuals in. The other is sort of what's going on in culture and society that would have sort of pushed people in. And we can look at it from both angles. So from the sort of the cultural, social perspective, in the 1970s, there were economic issues. There was sort of the Cold War was sort of, every, heat up and cool down, heat up and cool down. There were expectations that we might be blowing ourselves to smithereens, the nuclear weapons and such, growing economic problems, environmental This is, the era of sort of the dawning of sort of the awareness of the environmental crisis. So there were all sorts of reasons why, culturally speaking, people would feel like the Earth may be screwed. And a group which says, here's a way off it, would be appealing. We should also note simultaneously, there were a lot of very much more mainstream Christians who had very similar messages about the end of the world. As you read the book, I talk about this. One of the most popular Christian books at the time was Hal Lindsey's late great Planet Earth, which was basically a timetable of the end of the world, reading the book of Revelation through international diplomacy. And sort of, when the beast with four horns is mentioned, is that, the Soviet Union with its satellite states, when it talks about the moon turning to blood, is that atomic weaponry. So, I mean, in retrospect, it seems almost silly, because none of those predictions came to pass, but people really thought that the end of the world was around them. And you can see why that might push a person who's looking for meaning, who's looking for a chance to transform themselves, and who's basically fed up with the world, why they might at least listen to a guy who says, hey, yeah, we're from outer space, and you can be from outer space too.
Well, and you wonder, maybe it's not as silly either, in a sense that, and I certainly am not, the show is not one to get into politics, but look at the climate now, regardless of different types of where your mind is at right now. Some people think that this planet is going to hell in a handbasket really quickly. And a lot of people have. I had on a guest a couple of weeks ago that she believes that it's nothing but civil war and stuff coming forward. Whether that's true or not, I mean, in a way, it's like you said, back in the 70s, looking at what happened there. Yeah, it seems a bit silly, but here we are again, where people are they're frightened. They don't like what they think is going to happen.
I wrote this book like 10 or 15 years ago, and if I were to do it again, I would really stress the way in which Heaven's Gate was almost prescient in that sort of conspiratorialness, that idea that we're living in this precipice for the end of the world, and that there are these negative actors all around us, that there's literally conspiracies. Of course, they believe the conspiracies were quite literally sort of reptilian space aliens. But, again, pardon me, you don't have to get too political to see the resonance here.
Yeah.
And in no ways was Heaven's Gate sort of a direct precursor to QAnon and things like that. But you can see the resonance within broader culture that leads people to say the world is screwed up, and I need something to tell me how to either fix it or get away from it. And in the case of a person politically engaged, often they want to fix it, right? But Heaven's Gate and other groups like that, often the desire is just opt out. Literally, for Heaven's Gate, just get off the planet.
Yeah, I mean, anything sounds better than where I'm at right now, I suppose, is kind of the thought to that, I suppose. And one of the things too that you had mentioned earlier is sort of the psyche of the person who does stay on Heaven's Gate. Who everyone else is leaving, because you're right. I mean, from 300 to 500 people down to it's 39 that suicide, but there were more, right? That they just but it is like, what makes up this person where it's like this is their life, and you got to wonder, even some of these people knew where this was heading, perhaps, but it was still better than maybe the life they had. Maybe they've gone too far in life where they didn't feel like they could integrate back into society either.
Well, we know in many cases, because most of the members either left written or video testimony about in the final days and years before the end of the group, as to why they were members and why they were making the choices they did. Particularly the exit videos, which were recorded right before the suicides, within 48 hours of the the first wave. And while not every member left a video exit, many others left written statements in the book they published, and they talk about their lives. They talk about why they chose to join the group. And nearly every one of them looked at the earth and looked at human society and said, this is wrong. This is bad. I don't want to be part of this. Here are the problems I see, and I want to go somewhere else. I want to go to, as they called it, the next level. They wanted to become something else. That's what they said.
Do you think they were all in? A lot of these people, I mean, it's hard to tell, because I mean, we don't necessarily know, but I mean, it's just like, even though they're like, well, maybe it's not real, but it's better than what I have now.
It's a great question. We don't really know. So I have a colleague, Rob Balch, who studied the group for years and years before I did. And he tried to look at the exit videos and use with some sort of tool for trying to figure out when people are sort of convincing themselves of the truth. Are they blinking or looking away from the camera? It was inconclusive. He wasn't able to figure it out. But certainly there were some members of the final 39 probably who may not have been fully convinced, but this was something they had bought into and they were along for the ride, so to speak. But certainly the majority seemed to be fully committed to the project. There were people who left before the suicide. So Rio DeAngelo, the most famous, he's the one who found the bodies. Yep. When it was clear that they were going to commit, the language we use is suicide. They call it the exits. Yep. When it was clear to him they were going to have the exits, he said, no, I got business on this planet. I'm sticking around. There were others as well who, when the exits were first brought up, said, no, I'm not into this. So certainly there was plenty of time. I think people who really weren't sold had left already. But there's also, as a psychologist would call it, sort of the sunk cost issue. You've given up your life. You've abandoned your family. You've given up your job. You've been with the script for 20 years. And the idea of leaving that may have been unfathomable to some members. But it's impossible to know. I think most members believed. I certainly think that Doe, Applewhite, the founder, believed. Yeah. I think that the vast majority were convinced this was the truth. If we hold up as the yardstick, what is rational, it's really hard to study religion. So I study religion professionally. That's my job. And I'm not saying religion is irrational. It's not. But what it is non-rational. People's religious convictions are outside of the bounds of the yardstick of rationality. It doesn't mean they're wrong. Yep. It just means you can't measure them the same way you can measure math or science. So I wouldn't ask a member of Heaven's Gates, how do you know that UFO is real, any more than I would ask a Catholic, how do you know, that Jesus is real? How do you know sort of the experience you have in prayer is real? I mean, you can't get to that from outside the person. So you have a great question. It's just not answerable.
Right. And that's the foundation of faith, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Why don't we go ahead? Let's go ahead and do this. Let's take our first break. When we come back, I want to talk about the leaders. I also want to eventually get to the exit, I guess. It's an incredible conversation we're having with Ben Zeller. You're listening to GhostBox Radio on AM 950. Are you one of thousands of individuals who know you have psychic abilities but don't know how to tap into your higher self? Refined Divine is an extremely gifted psychic medium who offers classes that can help you reach your goals. Refined Divine holds classes Monday and Thursday at her 2 locations and via Zoom. Classes consist of manifestation, learning psychic abilities, shadow work, and healing trauma. Refined Divine has helped thousands, and she can help you.
This is Psychic Medium Deb. You can go to refineddivinepsychic.com.
Greg Bakun here. Like you, I love good, fresh, delicious food. So I want to tell you about this treasure in Roseville called Maverick's Real Roast Beef. Maverick's has the best roast beef sandwiches I've ever had. Made fresh every order. Add fries or onion rings dropped in the fryer when ordered, and you have a winning combination. Maverick's Real Roast Beef has a lot more than roast beef, so check out their website, mavericksbeef.com, or check out their restaurant on Lexington in Roseville.
Did you know that spiritual awakening is not all love and light? Surprise! Inner demons, ego deaths, and tower moments are on the horizon. But while life might hand you some harsh lessons, we've got the antidote to soothe your weary soul. Why not try a dragon's blood bath? Or schedule a Reiki aura repair? With books, herbs, talismans, candles, and more, we put the Shazam in shadow work. Visit Magus Books at 1848 Central Avenue Northeast in Minneapolis or magusbooks.com.
The Tilted Tiki, located in downtown Stillwater, helps you get your tropical tiki vibe on with a large selection of fantastic tasting tiki cocktails served in unique and fun glasses, a menu of delicious food ranging from small bites, craft tacos, sandwiches, and more. Plus, don't forget they have live music Wednesday through Saturday nights. Located in downtown Stillwater, the Tilted Tiki is your tropical relaxation restaurant in Minnesota. Visit thetiltedtiki.com.
Come on out to the Charvinity Psychic and Healing Fair in collaboration with Maria Shaw Minneapolis Convention, May 18th and 19th at the Doubletree by Hilton Minneapolis Airport Hotel, formerly known as the Marriott Airport Hotel. The Charvinity Psychic and Healing Fair features a selection of highly skilled and exceptional local psychic readers, healers, and practitioners, ensuring a wide array of premium services like Reiki, past life regression, and so much more. All practitioners offer something unique to help you. You can pre-book practitioners before going to the event and even possibly win a gift basket by visiting 5 or more practitioners at the fair. Also, if you pre-book and prepay for a 30-minute session, you get a weekend pass for Maria's classes for free, normally a $59 value. And the first 25 people who show up Saturday and Sunday will get a free gift bag. Charvinity Psychic and Healing Fair is May 18th and 19th at the Doubletree by Hilton, Minneapolis Airport, 9 to 5 both days. It's only $10 to get in. Visit charvinityfairs.com for all the details.
And as a reminder to everybody, I do have past episodes available on my Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/GhostBox Radio. I have eventually I'm going to have about nearly 400 episodes of this program that is available. If you want to listen to past episodes going back to 2015, they're not all there yet, but I'm putting them up there in waves, and it has an opportunity to listen to some of these great conversations as we are having right now, and a possibility to maybe learn something that you haven't heard about before and some of the topics. It starts as low as $3 a month, and every dollar that I get goes towards buying books for the guests that I have on so I can read about them and research, and some other equipment as well. So go to patreon.com/GhostBox Radio, and please consider supporting me on there. We are having a fantastic conversation. Author and professor of religion at Lake Forest College, Benjamin Zeller. We're talking about Heaven's Gate, America's UFO religion. I have a feeling that, Ben, we could talk about this for hours, couldn't we?
Yes, we could.
So fascinating and frightening and everything about that. I wanted to kind of switch the conversation, though, to the leaders. Because the leaders is, I mean, that's one of the things. I mean, you can't have a cult without a leader, in my opinion. I mean, they're always going to be that one that steps up and that's the one that guides. And in the case of Heaven's Gate, there were originally 2 of them. You had Marshall Applewhite, who is the one that's most known, also known as Doe, as we find out as time goes on. But then you have Bonnie Nettles, who she passes away in 1985, and if I'm not mistaken, she was to the cult. She was known as T.
Correct. Yeah, she was known as T. They used different names. T and Doe were the ones they used at the end. They were Bo and Peep earlier.
That's right.
They were actually Guinea and Pig even before that. But there was a sense of humor to the group. They were aware how funny this was. Yes, it's so you bring up the leaders. I mean, so those of us who study cults or new religions, we often talk about charisma, and the idea of charisma is really what drives this sort of religious leadership. It's a circular term because all that charisma really means is the ability to inspire people, right? But when you talk to members, you ask, my ex-members, talk to me about Bonnie Lou Nettles, about Marshall Herf Applewhite. And what I often got from ex-members was that Bonnie Lou Nettles was sort of the most deeply charismatic person they'd ever met. That when she spoke, you listened.
Wow.
That she had a certain spiritual, religious energy to her. People who are religious believers often use religious language for this. They said that she could hypnotize you, or she could read your aura, or she could look into your soul. You felt an energy, a buzz. You saw lights coming out of her. Those who are not making religious claims would say that she was deeply charismatic. She had a charismatic ability. Applewhite was also charismatic as well. And they were the 2 founders. And they met in 1972, and they founded the group, really, depending on how you date it, either 70, 74, 75, and then they were making converts by then. The 2 of them together were sort of a really powerful pair. She was usually the more quiet one. Applewhite did most of the public speaking, and he was trained as a performer. So whereas Nettles, her charisma was probably quite inborn. It was just a certain part of her personality. And again, believers believed that she was just sort of this personality from outer space. She had these sort of supernatural powers. Applewhite was trained. He was trained as a musician. He was trained as a performer. He was same line of work as me, actually, former college professor. As a college professor, I'm trained to keep my students engaged, right? So he knew how to work a room.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so his charisma was much more sort of it was developed. But again, ex-members told me that he was equally charismatic in that way. And he did most of the speaking, as one would expect for someone who was sort of trained to do so. The claims they made, though, were the central part of that charisma. Because it's one thing to talk to someone and be persuasive. It's another to claim you're from outer space. And that's really what they claimed. Initially, they claimed actually that they were from outer space and they were fulfilling a prophecy from the book of Revelation. And that built over time. And really, that was the combination to the end. They were both from outer space, which appealed to people interested in UFOs, in what we would call the New Age movements. But also, it was a biblical claim. They were fulfilling biblical prophecy from the book of Revelation for the end of the world. And then eventually, by the end of the group, they came to believe that T, or Bonnie Lou Nettles, was the extraterrestrial being the Bible refers to as God. So she's Jehovah. She is the God the Father, if you're Christian. And that Applewhite was her lieutenant, the being who is referred to in the Christian Bible as Jesus. So it's a different model. So it's not classic Trinitarianism because they're separate people. But as many Christians have throughout time, they claim that they're actually separate beings. And that just as Jesus came before to try to save the world, so too the same being came back as Marshall Herff Applewhite, as Doe, to give us one more chance before the end of the world. And they actually they are very clear about this. They published a newspaper article talking about this. An advertisement in USA Today. So they actually have a national advertisement declaring this, and it was all over sort of their materials. It was on their posters. So they don't shy away from this. It's a very sort of extreme claim. So they make it quite publicly.
They believed it. They believed what they were, basically.
Sure, yeah. Now we should note, this is actually pretty common among new religions or cults. The claim that your founder, your leader, either is Christ returned, or Christian cults, of course, or Christian groups, either is Christ returned, or is sort of the next Christ, or is the next prophetic figure. Famously, maybe the Branch Davidians would be the best example. David Koresh believed that he was sort of the next Christ, not the same as the previous Christ, but there was a series of Christs, and he was the next one. Certainly, there are analogs to other groups as well, sort of Messiah figures. That is a powerful claim, a powerful draw. And you can see why, if you meet someone who says they're the Messiah or that says they're God, you might want to listen to them. So it's not just, are they charismatic? It's the content of the message. I've met a few people who've made similar claims.
Well, and I was just going to say, I have a quick story here about... it was just after, actually, probably 98 or so, that I had a friend, a good friend of mine. He was living in an area that he was having some neighbors were kind of weird. They were kind of weird people. And next thing I know, that he believed that he was basically a Messiah, and that those two neighbors, a husband and wife, were basically worshiping him. And, to your point, when someone starts saying that, sometimes it's amazing what you get in terms of people following. I think what ended up happening, what we found out later, is that they were doing LSD, and he started saying that he got some visions and stuff, and it kind of went from there. But it's actually frightening. I don't even know what to say about it. It's just actually frightening how that happened, and it's like... he would sit in his house, and this only lasted for a few weeks, but a few weeks too long, of him like, I see visions. I see visions all around the world of mass destruction and stuff, and like, okay, all right, sure.
There's a lot to unpack there.
A lot to unpack.
One of the things we can say is that in Christianity in particular, we can say the same about other religions as well, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism. The texts are so easily interpreted that it's very easy to make messianic, prophetic, millennial, end-of-the-world claims based on them. Nearly every religious tradition has these sort of texts which are open-ended enough where a person can make these claims. So we see this broadly across different religions and different cultures. The other is, as you mentioned, the use of techniques to do this. Now, the person you knew used LSD, you said. So you can use direct chemical means. Members of Heaven's Gate actually use no drugs whatsoever, but they did engage in meditation. And we know from neurological studies of religion that, while it's not the same thing as dropping acid and seeing God, what happens in your brain when you're meditating or praying or fasting or twirling around or sitting in silence, all of these things actually cause changes in the brain. So it's entirely plausible to understand that the sort of that mystical experience is the heart of many of these. So if you're prone to belief in the end of the world, and you're reading a text you can interpret as saying the end of the world, and you have a mystical experience about that leads you to believe in the end of the world, you can see why this is plausible, even for a person who's otherwise, we would say, quote unquote, sane. And again, I don't want to use the yardstick of sanity to talk about religion, because every religion makes claims which, if you're outside the religion, you scratch your head and say, you believe what now? It's not my place to judge. Now, it's easy ex post facto to judge a group which ends in mass suicide. It's much more difficult when you meet someone or who says, the end of the world is coming and, a comet's going to blow us all up. It's much more difficult, though, when the group is going at the time. People didn't look at Heaven's Gate in the 1970s and 80s and say, well, that group's going to end in suicide. Even people who knew them months before the suicides didn't think that they were going to exit as they said. Members knew. But it's really hard after the fact. I mean, before the fact.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good point. I mean, within the show, within the work I do, there are a lot of people who believe in a lot of different things. And I think you're absolutely right. Who am I to ever judge what they're believing is right or wrong or anything? And it's a very good reminder to us that there's a lot of New Age religions. There's a lot of different sort of groups that are together that have a belief system, and you don't always look at them and think right away, oh my gosh, this is going to end in suicide. I mean, that's just not the way we think about stuff. We probably do, though, know more now than we did back in the 90s because of stuff like Heaven's Gate or the Branch Davidians, because you start wondering. It's funny, actually. I think you start wondering about any small group that gets together are very like-minded, but we don't apply that to bigger religions, though, either, because it's the same, just a matter of scale.
Sure. I've seen the cult language deployed against broader religions, usually by people who are ex-members who are angry with it. So an ex-Catholic who says, well, the Pope's a cult leader, or an ex-Jew who says, all those rabbis, they're leading a cult. I've seen it used politically as well. I've seen people say, well, the progressives are all part of a cult, or the Trumpies are all part of a cult. Yeah. So I've seen the word used in that way. Usually it has no real meaning at that point. It just means I don't like the group.
Totally.
You can sort of pull out of it sort of the idea of charisma and the idea of sort of a leader. So you can see why a person might say, if they don't like the Pope and they don't like the Catholic Church, why they use that sort of cult language, because they see the Pope. Literally, the Pope does have the ability to sort of speak on behalf of the church. I mean, that's a charismatic claim. Again, if you don't like Donald Trump, you can say, well, I see sort of in him sort of a charismatic leader, or same on the left, right? So I think that ultimately what we're often saying there, though, is that we recognize the danger of groupthink. And I think that's part of it as well, which is what you were saying earlier. There's the idea that sort of when groups get together and invest in a charismatic leader and make powerful claims about the nature of the world, that's when the cult radar goes up, right?
Yeah.
It's not actually a term I use. I don't think that cult has a lot of social scientific value, because it is such a sort of a messy term. I tend to use the term new religious movements, but then we have to exclude political groups. I mean, I don't study politics, but I'm sure someone could look at sort of political groups and say, well, they act like cults in a certain way. They have to define what they mean.
And I think it's a really good point too. That we do, if something we don't like, it's given a term that is very broad and often very derogatory. And I think it really goes to show those examples that you gave. I think it's a great example of how leaders do play a massive role in whether or not which direction what you do in certain situations.
Sure.
Politics, not to get into the nitty gritty of politics, like you said, both sides. You're going to like the leader probably first and foremost before, that's a big part of where you stand. And I think the cherry on top will be how the leader kind of sways you. And I mean, I think that's how it is.
No, I think you're right. And that's not to say that there aren't new religions or cults, which actually aren't bad. They clearly are.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't condone suicides. I mean, Heaven's Gate ended in a suicide. The Branch Davidians we mentioned earlier, their leader David Koresh was engaged in pedophilia. I don't condone that either. That's bad. This is a bad group doing bad things.
Yeah.
However, of all the groups labeled cults, most of them probably are not doing that, right? We may not like them. I don't believe in Christian fundamentalism, and I can see why people want to call a Christian fundamentalist group a cult, but that doesn't mean that there's this, that it is. It just means I don't like it.
Yeah. I mean, that makes perfect sense. Before we head off to break here, I did have a question in regards to Bonnie Nettles. She passes away in 1985.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know how the cult handled her passing? And with that, I mean, did they just say that she died, or was it that she actually rejoined her civilization or whatever?
It was the latter, and I've spoken to people who were present there, because there are some ex-members who were present in the build-up to her death or at her death, who then left the group, who I could still talk to. And the message I got from them, and also from the material left by the group, they actually wrote about it and talked about it. Their interpretation was that her human body simply couldn't handle her extraterrestrial next level energy. She burnt it up. It would be like, trying to jam a car battery into a flashlight. It just, she glowed bright for a while, and then she burnt up. And so she had to go back. And I guess I wouldn't say she at that point. The entity within her had to go back, and that entity T had to return to the next level because the human body couldn't hold it. They're drawing from sort of this walk-in idea, this idea that sort of these extraterrestrial beings can sort of take over a human body. So we see that in sort of UFO pop culture, the idea that that you can sort of, it's almost a possession.
Yeah.
So her body was almost possessed. This is very contentious. I have argued this is what enables the suicides later on. There's a separation between the body and the soul or the consciousness. Several ex-members have told me that they find this deeply concerning, and they completely reject it, that actually they had always taught they were separate from the body. So I want to note that was something they'd always taught, that you are not your body. There's more to you than that. You are sort of a consciousness, a soul. And it wasn't that her death or the departure of T enabled it from their perspective. But I have to say, as an historian, I don't think the suicides would have happened, though, if T hadn't have set that model earlier on in the 1980s.
Wow.
I do think, because she demonstrated to believers that your body can die. I mean, they cremated her body, and you continue, because Doe claimed for the next decade to be receiving messages from her. So that was proof for the members that you are not your body. So again, I want to give credence to ex-members who have told me, no, this wasn't why. But I do think it's worth noting that if Bonnie Lou Nettles hadn't have died, there wouldn't have been that direct evidence for members of the group that this can happen, because they believed that T was still leading them. She was leading them from outer space, and she was communicating via her channel, via Doe. With the group. Doe would receive sort of, not sort of messages, but he would receive sentiments. He would receive sort of ideas. She was actually a channel before her death. She claimed she could directly communicate with the next level. Doe never made that claim. He never claimed you could actually get messages from her, but he claimed that he was sort of tuned into her and would receive sort of her guidance in a general sense.
Wow. That is really fascinating. Why don't we go ahead and do this? Let's take our next break. We are talking with Benjamin Zeller, the author of Heaven's Gate, America's UFO Religion. When we come back, I want to talk about the exit that we've been talking about the whole program. You're listening to GhostBox Radio on AM 950. Are you one of thousands of individuals who know you have psychic abilities but don't know how to tap into your higher self? Refined Divine is an extremely gifted psychic medium who offers classes that can help you reach your goals. Refined Divine holds classes Monday and Thursday at her 2 locations and via Zoom. Classes consist of manifestation, learning psychic abilities, shadow work, and healing trauma. Refined Divine has helped thousands, and she can help you.
This is Psychic Medium Deb. You can go to refinedivinepsychic.com.
Greg Bakun here. Like you, I love good, fresh, delicious food. So I want to tell you about this treasure in Roseville called Maverick's Real Roast Beef. Maverick's has the best roast beef sandwiches I've ever had. Made fresh, every order. Add fries or onion rings dropped in the fryer when ordered, and you have a winning combination. Maverick's Real Roast Beef has a lot more than roast beef, so check out their website, mavericksbeef.com, or check out their restaurant on Lexington in Roseville.
Come on out to the Charvinity Psychic and Healing Fair in collaboration with Maria Shaw Minneapolis Convention, May 18th and 19th at the Doubletree by Hilton Minneapolis Airport Hotel, formerly known as the Marriott Airport Hotel. The Charvinity Psychic and Healing Fair features a selection of highly skilled and exceptional local psychic readers, healers, and practitioners, ensuring a wide array of premium services like Reiki, past life regression, and so much more. All practitioners offer something unique to help you. You can pre-book practitioners before going to the event and even possibly win a gift basket by visiting 5 or more practitioners at the fair. Also, if you pre-book and prepay for a 30-minute session, you get a weekend pass for Maria's classes for free, normally a $59 value. And the first 25 people who show up Saturday and Sunday will get a free gift bag. Charvinity Psychic and Healing Fair is May 18th and 19th at the Doubletree by Hilton, Minneapolis Airport, 9 to 5 both days. It's only $10 to get in. Visit charvinityfairs.com for all the details.
Did you know that spiritual awakening is not all love and light? Surprise! Inner demons, ego deaths, and tower moments are on the horizon. But while life might hand you some harsh lessons, we've got the antidote to soothe your weary soul. Why not try a dragon's blood bath? Or schedule a Reiki aura repair. With books, herbs, talismans, candles, and more, we put the Shazam in shadow work. Visit Magus Books at 1848 Central Avenue Northeast in Minneapolis or magusbooks.com.
The Tilted Tiki, located in downtown Stillwater, helps you get your tropical tiki vibe on with a large selection of fantastic tasting tiki cocktails served in unique and fun glasses, a menu of delicious food ranging from small bites, craft tacos, sandwiches, and more. Plus, don't forget they have live music Wednesday through Saturday nights. Located in downtown Stillwater, the Tilted Tiki is your tropical relaxation restaurant in Minnesota. Visit thetiltedtiki.com. And join me tomorrow on GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun. We're going to have on the French Quarter medium, Maria Shaw, and, of course, my good friend Char Savoy. They're going to stop by, talk about the Charvinity Psychic and Healing Fair that is May 18th and 19th. We've been talking about it all month, and I hope that you have a chance to come on out. We're going to be breaking down what to expect there. Plus, Maria Shaw is a fantastic astrologer, so maybe she'll have some hints for us as we get into the second half of the year. We are having a fantastic conversation tonight with Benjamin E. Zeller. His book is called Heaven's Gate, America's UFO Religion, and this is available on Amazon, and I highly recommend you go get this because it really is a fantastic breakdown of what happened. And like we talked about at the beginning, Ben, I think so many people are focused on the end result to what happened here that to get to that, and our discussion right before the break about Bonnie's death and how that could have contributed to the ultimate exit for these 39 people in the mass suicide is so fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. And actually, I mean, if we include the other members, there were 39 in Rancho Santa Fe, but there were several other ex-members who later committed exits as well. So we're actually up to almost 45 people when we include sort of all the individuals. Yeah, the exits are what we remember, of course, and that was intentional. Members of Heaven's Gate saw themselves as demonstrating, that was their word, the demonstration. They were demonstrating to the world the truth of their message. And that was actually a term they used early on for what they believed would be sort of their, the founders thought they would be assassinated early on. But then the idea of demonstrating to the world their message was central. So I think some of the theatrical components of the exits were quite intentional. The use of uniforms, the patches, the Nike shoes and such. Now, part of that was their beliefs. So they believed they were part of a crew, and they believed that they were part of a spaceship crew, and sort of the sci-fi elements they thought were sort of resonated with that. And they were aware, they knew Star Trek was made up, right? But they liked sort of the elements of Star Trek. And they actually said at one point, we're going to use sort of the language of Star Trek to talk about ourselves.
Sure.
But the uniforms, which look sort of very Star Trek-ish, they were aware of that. But it represented both sort of a way to get attention, which succeeded, and also a reflection of their own self-conceptions as part of a crew, and part of a crew that would indeed sail around in outer space, like the Enterprise, and take care of societies and civilizations and weed as needed and help as needed, and sort of they saw themselves as sort of extraterrestrial angels, basically, and that's how they understood the exits. They just thought they had to leave. And one of the members, actually, again making a science fiction, a Star Trek reference, said 39 to beam up, referred to in their exit video as the Star Trek idea, and they called themselves, again to make a Star Trek reference, an away team. So the away team for your listeners and viewers who've not seen Star Trek: The Next Generation. So first of all, shame on you. You have to see it.
Right, no kidding. My goodness.
Absolutely. But in the 1990s, anyone remotely interested in UFOs or things like that would have seen it. So when they call themselves an away team, people would have known what that means. That meant you're from the ship. You're from outer space. You've come down to the planet to do something, and then you go back. And it might look to the primitive people of Earth as if it were a suicide, but they knew they were just returning to their ship as they were supposed to. So I think they really quite intentionally chose that language of beaming up or of the away team to appeal to a broader audience and say, well, you already believe in these ideas through fiction, but it's actually true, was their claim.
Now, Doe and T both believe that they were basically aliens on Earth. What about those 39 in particular? Did they think that they were also aliens by this point as well?
This is one of the most interesting things about Heaven's Gates. The teachings are unclear. At times, Doe and T and the members seem to believe and seem to say explicitly that they were from outer space. They had come to this planet to experience humanity and the Earth in order to contribute to their own spiritual development, and they would return to where they came from. At other times, individual members seem to imply actually that they had always been on Earth, and this was their graduation into sort of this next level of existence. Now, they did believe in reincarnation, so it could have actually been a mix. I actually think this is fascinating because as a scholar of new religions or of cults, we tend to think about them as very sort of singular. There's one thing you believe and everyone believes. In this case, actually, different members seem to believe different things. Some clearly believed they never belonged on this planet. They came here from outer space, and back they were going to where they belonged. Others thought they were now sort of, again, the language they used was graduating. They were graduating to their next existence, and that they had come up through the ranks of sort of human existence through a reincarnation-based system. So probably both. And at times, Doe seems to imply it's one or the other, but I think there was disagreement. I think there was within the group sort of a differing of opinion over that.
And to be clear, unlike what eventually looked like for Branch Davidian, where people are blocking doors and stuff, if you wanted to leave, there was no harm to the people of this religion. There was no force to keep them there, right?
Correct. And people came and left all the time. Both came and left and didn't come back. But also members of the group who were present among the 39 went out to, a person went out to get some dental work done the week before. Someone went to pay their library fines. They went to buy they broke a dish. They went to a store to buy it. So anyone who wanted to leave could have done that. You checked out a car. You went, you did your they called it an out of craft task. Then you came back. So there were many opportunities for anyone. You could have just left.
Yep.
And there were also people who actually said to Doe and others, hey, I'm leaving. And then there was sort of, a formal departure as opposed to disappearing in the middle of the night. There's no indication anyone was forced. Now, I should note, there would have been real peer pressure, and there would have been the social dynamics of a group where everyone had bought into suicide as a way to end the group's existence. And there was a theological claim that if you didn't do this, you were doomed to reincarnate on a dying Earth as opposed to your one chance off the planet. So there was clear social psychology, there was clear theology. But no, you're absolutely, people could have left at any moment. I think the people left at the end basically were committed and were believers, and those who didn't had already left.
Yeah.
But this is again something we can never really know.
Trying to put it together the best that you can based on the people that are still around. How many former members have you been able to talk to?
Oh, I don't know. I'd say I've talked in depth to 6 or 7, and then I've had correspondences with maybe twice that. A lot of my data comes from archival sources, from
Sure.
looking at the material the group produced, and then sort of interviews with these ex-members. And some ex-members sat down for sort of formal interviews with me. In fact, I had one where it was 2 days basically of me taping them talking about their stories.
Wow.
Others, it's email correspondence. Before I published the book, I sent it to all the people who I talked to. Not all of them got back to me, but some of them got back with corrections. And it never corrections by interpretation, but a correction to a fact. This didn't happen then. This wasn't there. So they knew better than I do. I actually, there's a lot more people out there who I could have gotten in contact with, and I kept getting the same stories after a while. So at one point, I sort of said to myself, I'm just gonna write the book as opposed to continuing to gather data. And again, if I had to do over again, I could probably talk to another dozen or so people. I don't think I get anything different. I would feel maybe a little more complete, but the story wouldn't change. So when I had the story down, I stopped.
And one of the things you mentioned is the videotaping and stuff, and that is one of the big parts of all this exit, because Doe did an exit video. That was and that was really kind of taking advantage of technology at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, we should note actually. Heaven's Gate was also famous for that website. They weren't the first group at the website, but they were one of the first new religions or cults to have a website in that way. And they actually did make a few converts online, not through the website actually, through other social media, or today we'd call it social media, Usenet at the time.
Sure.
But they were sort of, bleeding edge innovators in that way. Today, any new religion or cultic group is going to have an online presence.
Yeah.
Maybe, not on the web anymore. Now it's on TikTok or it's on Instagram or something else. But the idea of using the internet to reach potential members and to advertise is now assumed. This was brand new. I remember some of the media coverage in 1997 after the suicides. There was almost a moral panic. It was sort of like the satanic panic from a decade earlier of oh dear, there are cults out there and they're going to use the internet to get our children. In fact, that did not come to pass, but you could see the immediate panic of people who had no idea what the internet was, no idea what a website was, and thought, oh no, here's another way. 20 years ago, it was rock music and playing the Beatles backwards, and now it's a website is gonna get our kids. So it's not to be clear, I take this very seriously, and I take into the suicide very seriously. But there was a lot of social response, which you scratch your head and said that they thought, what now?
Taking it too far, absolutely. And I was surprised as I went, and at the Heaven's Gate website, it's still around.
Yeah, it is, and it is run by ex-members. If you were to email them and their email is up there, they will tell you they don't support suicide and the group is no longer active. You can't join. They keep it active because they believe their instructions from the group were to maintain it. So they see themselves as maintaining the legacy of the group. But there is no group and you can't join anymore. And if you email them, they say, don't commit suicide. There's no group to join. It's over. But I have spoken to the individuals who run the website, and they, I don't want to speak for other people, but I will say a lot of the ex-members I've spoken to, you can tell this was their family. If you're part of a group for 15, 20 years, these are the people you're closest to. And when you believe they've asked you to maintain their legacy, you do that. So I think a lot of the ex-members look at their time in Heaven's Gate and they find meaning and value in the experience. And certainly some don't. Some look at it and say, well, that was crazy. I'm glad I wasn't part of the group. But some, the ones who maintain the website, the ones who still talk about it, Sawyer, for example, you can find Sawyer online very easily. He has a big web presence. He talks about his time in the group. And he has criticisms, of course, but he really sees it as fundamental to his life and his life journey. And there were others like that as well I spoke with. I guess now that I think about it, probably about a dozen people I talked to. And again, it was the same basic story.
And when you said that, like, no one can join anything, has there been any other people trying to do a resurgence of that group at all in the last 30 years?
There was briefly a group, I believe, in Canada that called themselves Heaven's Gate: The Next Generation. I think it was mostly sort of an internet joke. I'm not sure. I'm actually quite certain that no group ever formed. There might have been some email correspondence, but there was never actually an actual group. No one got together. Certainly there was no suicide. So that is the only group I'm aware of. There are some individuals today. I've actually spoken to some people who have converted, who believe. in Heaven's Gate's message more recently. I wouldn't say there's a group, but there are individuals, including mostly ex-members, but also some new converts who accept the basic premise of the movement, albeit probably not the suicide part.
Wow. It's interesting. It's so fascinating, just every aspect of this. And I think what I really appreciate from your point of view is the openness of just being able to, you're presenting what you've learned, you presenting your information, which obviously anyone who is doing this on a level, that a scholarly level that you're doing it on, obviously that's how you're going to maintain it. But I mean, just that, let people read it and just find out about it. And I appreciate that very much.
Thank you. I think what drives me is the sense to understand and the sense to have some level of empathy. I don't condone their choices, and I would never join this group. I don't believe as they do, but I want to try to understand the humanity of people. Ironically, people who reject their own humanity in this case. But I want to understand what drove them and who they were as people, because I think we're all just doing our best here.
Absolutely. The book, once again, is called Heaven's Gate, America's UFO Religion, written by Benjamin Zeller. Go to Amazon. Please pick it up. It's fantastic. Thank you, Ben, very much for being a part of it tonight. Really appreciate it.
Greg, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. We'll be back tomorrow with Maria Shaw and Char Savoy. Have a great night, everybody.